Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. And today we're talking about the brand new and very exciting Candlekeep Mysteries. This is the newest D&D book. It came out last week. And I have been very copiously reading through everything, taking my huge notebook full of notes, and I am ready here to give my review of those adventures. I admit up front that I have not played through or run any of these yet. This is based purely on me reading them and analyzing them based on what's on the page. So it is entirely possible that something that I think doesn't work in the text actually works really well in practice, and vice versa. I think I've got a pretty good handle on them, but there's the caveat, okay? So let's talk about the Candlekeep Mysteries. This is a collection of 17 kind of one-shot short adventures. These are not campaigns. These are designed to fit into your own homebrew campaign that you are running as a GM for your players, or that you're a player and you're watching this video for some reason. So these fit into there. There's 17 of them, like I said, and they go from level 1 up through level 16. Level 4 gets 2. And these are all based around Candlekeep, which is the amazing, wonderful library that is on the Sword Coast in Faerun. There's some advice in the beginning of the book about how you could translate this to other settings, such as Eberron, and that's there, and it's nice to have. I tend to prefer Eberron as a setting, and I haven't run something, like Earth or Orth or however you're supposed to pronounce it. Faerun is a serviceable setting that all of the D&D 5 adventure books are kind of based in. That's the default for this edition of the game. There's advice as well for Exandria, whatever that one's called. So, anyway, they've done a good job of kind of making it malleable, making it a little modular, so that you can fit it into your own campaign, so that you can fit it into your own setting. And each of the adventures comes with, at the beginning, some notes about how can you include this particular story into your ongoing campaign. And that's also really great. Some of those work super well. Some of them do not work very well at all. But we'll get to those later. On the whole, I find this book to be incredibly compelling, very well done. There's really only one or two of the adventures in it that I think are kind of drab, and even those could be absolutely spiced up. Some of them are wonderful. In fact, there are 4 different ones, I think 4, maybe 5, that I've marked in my notes. This is probably the best one. And I found myself marking that at least 4 times. So they're really, really solid stories. It begins, let's take a look. Let's jump right into this. And as always, I've got the D&D Beyond version up. You can buy the physical version, or you can buy the D&D Beyond version. I'm pretty sure that it's on Roll20, but I haven't checked. So it starts with this first chapter here. There's a book of books that's all about how to use them, and that's talking about what I just said, and blah, 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 how to pull everything together. The next little bit here is Candlekeep itself, which is a really interesting place. It's more than just a library, though it clearly is that. What it is more than just a library is almost a religious site dedicated to knowledge itself as an ultimate good. They are trying to collect as much of the written word, as much of the collected knowledge of the multiverse as possible. And in fact, you're not even allowed into the library unless you bring them as payment something written that they don't already have. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to find a long-lost spell book or something in order to pay your way in. Kind of anything. If you've kept a personal diary, that counts, and you can get in like that. It's a really interesting idea, and they go into a lot of it. So here's once you are in, once you've gotten in, there's the avowed, who are the priests who run the place. And here's a bunch of different ones who can help you kind of find what you're looking for, and they're very helpful little docents of this library that can walk you around to help you do your research. It describes all the various defenses in case you decide to sneak in. There's also at least one adventure in here that involves one of the books being stolen or attempted to be stolen. And so it's important to know some of these defenses that are in there as well. There's this cool picture. You can see that this library has a collection of a lot of different architectural styles, and in some cases the avowed priests have actually brought buildings from other parts of the world here, brick by brick, and rebuilt them. So there's a lot of different things. It's more than just one building. There's a good map in here. Where's the map? Here we go. So there's this map where you get in through various directions, and then there's different kinds of... There's this massive courtyard out here. There's all of these towers that include things. This is honestly not a great map because it, A, doesn't look anything like that picture we looked at earlier. B, doesn't include, some of the locations that are mentioned by name in some of the adventures. But as maps go, I guess it's a good way of showing, look, this is way more than just a single library. It is this enormous complex that is in, Candlekeep. It's a keep. It's a castle. And so, anyway, it's kind of a neat setting. And then they've got, descriptions here of what is the Court of Air and what's in it, and all these other things. They have the Inner Ward, which is where the really fancy, extremely rare, often extremely dangerous books are held. And then there is a little section of what is going on underneath the library. And I loved this one. There's this huge undead ghost dragon. Come on, show us a picture of Miriam. There we go. Who just was trapped there and has been there for so long that she's just kind of become one of the librarians now. And so she can help you out if you're nice to her. Anyway, it's kind of neat, and I dig it. So, what every book includes, or I call them books. Every adventure is based around a single book. And what each of them include is a story hook of some kind to get you into the adventure. And these come in kind of 3 flavors. One of them is... Well, let me rephrase this. There's kind of 2 ways of finding the book, which is A, you're sent there by somebody in order to investigate a specific thing, or B, you're in the castle in Candlekeep for some other reason and you happen to stumble across this book. Some of those work better than others. In general, I tend to prefer the ones where somebody sends you in on purpose to find this thing, but that doesn't work in every case, and they've done a pretty good job of mixing those up. Now, once you find the book, again, there are 2 kinds of adventures that spin off from there. Number 1, this book has introduced you to a weird idea and you need to track it down and figure out what's going on. Or B, the book just opens a portal, and it's kind of funny, probably not surprising, how many adventures in this book depend on the book. Just you find this weird book, it tells you something, and then a portal opens and you can go through it and go to an adventure. Both of those systems work really well, but as I said, some of the hooks work better than some of the other hooks. So let's just dive in, and I'm going to give a relatively spoiler-free review of each one of these. Although, there will be some spoilers. If you are a player rather than a GM, maybe this is the time to stop watching. Don't worry, if I'm about to say a big spoiler, I will tell you in advance before I say it. So, let's move on here. The very first one, level 1, the Joy of ExtraDimensional Spaces. This is one of those book opens a portal things, as you can probably guess by the name. And honestly, I really love this one. The first thing I wrote in my notes is that this adventure depends on the characters acting foolishly, which is kind of a reference to the fact that the book opens a portal and nothing happens unless you go through it. I have run several groups that would gleefully dive through that portal. I've run several groups that would refuse to go through the portal, at which point you're kind of stuck trying to figure out how to get them through. I initially thought that maybe if you could just have them sucked into the portal, that would work, but it wouldn't actually work based on some things that happen later. Regardless, once they go through the portal, however you manage that, what follows is honestly a really charming little level 1 dungeon crawl through a well-appointed, comfy little manor house. It's largely abandoned, but not entirely. It's basically the magical mansion spell that has somehow become permanent. And so there's a beautiful little kitchen, and there's some little, like, gremlins or homunculi in there that make food. There's neat things to explore. There's an observatory that looks at fake stars. There's all just kinds of neat things. The monsters that you fight are animated bookshelves or tables or, the suits of armor on the wall that become animated and attack you. And so it is very much a dungeon crawl, but it is, like I said, it's very charming. It's not the typical dungeon that you would think. You're going through a house, room by room, dealing with all the magical shenanigans that are there and trying to solve, basically the puzzle is how to get back out again. But it's really delightful. It's very different. There's nothing really malicious in it. It's just kind of cute, and I really like it. The big problem with this one, if it could be said to be a problem, is that it does include a hook that starts off by saying, hey, you need to go find this guy in order to save this village from dying. And then the entire adventure is, you found the guy but got trapped in this mansion, how do you get back out again? And so once you get back out again, there's absolutely no details whatsoever. The adventure is done. And yet that hook of saving the village that had been cursed or whatever is just kind of dangling there. So, as a GM, you're going to have to either invent a bunch of stuff to resolve that adventure hook, or you're going to come up with your own adventure hook based on your own things. Either way, this is a really cute adventure that I liked a lot. Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions is Adventure 2 here. This is another really good one. I can see this one working really well. It's very free and open. There's nothing railroady about it in any sense. And what I liked about this is that it starts off so small and then keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and revealing more danger and more storyline as you go. And the hook is fairly simple, that you are in Candlekeep for whatever reason. Most of these hooks are very light on details because they are designed to fit into an ongoing campaign. So, for whatever reason, you're in Candlekeep and you happen to find this book, and rather than being full of the information you were looking for, it turns into a little monster and attacks you. And you talk to the other librarians, you're like, hey, I'm sorry, this book got destroyed because it attacked us. It wasn't really a book, it was a monster. And they say, oh, that's been happening a lot lately. And then they give you some information, and you leave Candlekeep and you go explore a couple of different places in a couple of different cities and track down, the source of the mystery. And it's really well done. Very simple, but I liked it. Like I said, weak hook, but a really strong story that carries you through. So, big thumbs up to Mazfroth's Mighty Digressions. How about The Book of the Raven? This one is one of the ones that I liked the least, honestly. Like I said, there are only two that I think are pretty drab. This is one of those two. It's a haunted house story, but there's no villain, and the house is haunted for, there's nothing malevolent about it. All the kind of cute, non-malicious stuff that I really loved in the level 1 adventure, that's not here. It's clearly designed to be a spooky haunted house full of ghosts and monsters, but there's no story to it. It doesn't. The cuteness doesn't work because, or I guess I should say, the lack of malevolence doesn't work because it's clearly designed to be a scary bad place, And so the fact that it kind of goes out with a whimper and there's no real villain and there's in fact no real story really was a letdown to me. So, Book of the Raven, we're done talking about you. First of these four, the first of the 2 level 4s, is a similar haunted thing, but works way better. This one begins with the hook that somebody is trying to figure out what happened to a lost mine. And in the process of researching that, you discover that not only is the mine lost, the town that used to be near the mine is abandoned and fallen and crumbling into decay. And so you end up leaving Candlekeep to go out and figure out what's up with this town. And on your way there, you stop at a different town and meet some of the people who used to, decades ago, live in the lost town, who are gone now. And they talk about, kind of the horrible nightmares that drove them away. And once you get to the lost town itself, it is a pretty effective horror story. It's kind of eldritch in a way, that it focuses on nightmares and madness, and you don't always know exactly what's going on. So it's a pretty effective little horror scenario, and kudos to that. Now, the next one here, Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme, this is one of the 4 where I marked probably the best one in the book. This is yet another horror-ish scenario. There's no hook whatsoever. There's just nothing in here to say, hey, this is what's... You've got to come up with that on your own. However, once you do that, it's kind of wonderful. And in fact, in some ways, it's kind of Star Trek-ish. And I don't want to give anything away, but it's got a lot of fun social stuff in it, including paranoia. Basically, it's a storybook. In fact, there's a really wonderful picture here. Let me see if I can find it way at the end. Because it's not really a book, it's a pop-up book. Come on, where are you? Where's the pop-up book? There we go. So that's the book. And this is one of my favorite illustrations in all of the Candlekeep mysteries. It's just showing 4 little scenarios, and the characters, once they are presented with this, and the hook is as weak as somebody you're I remember what the hook for this one is. It's ridiculous. The hook is, maybe the characters think it would be fun to sleep in a library. I'm not making that up. That's what the hook is. So once you get into the library, you're in a place called the Firefly Cellar, and there is a curse basically gets unleashed, in which people start singing the same little tune. And as soon as that happens, one of the librarians is like, crap, the little tune curse has gotten loose, and it's apparently an infectious curse, and so they lock the Firefly Cellar. And you are locked in the Firefly Cellar with some other librarians, some other patrons, and you're all kind of stuck there until you can figure out where this curse is coming from and how to resolve it. It's a bit of a spoiler to say, it's this thing, but, you don't know where that's coming from. And so each one of these 4 scenes is a verse of this little nursery rhyme. And the curse progresses from people singing the tune over and over in their heads to eventually singing the nursery rhyme over and over in your heads. And there's a lot of, like I said, social interaction and paranoia as you try to figure out, who can you trust, who is hiding information from you, who is about to snap and maybe start hurting people. There's some combat potential. There's some sneaking around potential, though not a ton. It's just neat. I wish that there had been more musical guidance, because the players are supposed to catch this curse, and they're supposed to start humming the little tune in their heads. And that would be a lot easier if there was a note in there saying, here, use this really catchy, the monkey chased the weasel or something like that. And as a game master, you'll just have to come up with that and make sure that it is a tune that can get stuck in their heads. And then, make sure it matches the lyrics once the lyrics eventually come out. Anyway, the way that the adventure progresses, you can kind of see here the events as they go from one to the next. There's a wonderful climax once they figure out where the curse is coming from and how to solve it, and then they have to actually solve it. Can't say enough good about Shemshime's Bedtime Rhyme. It's a really, really stellar little scenario that I absolutely loved. Ironically, the next one here, Price of Beauty, which is the level 5 scenario, I also wrote maybe the best next to my notes in this, because this one is incredibly good. This one is by Mark Holmes. He's the GM of the actual play Twitch show called High Rollers, and if you watch that one, you're familiar with him. He has done a lot of, professional GMing and GM streaming, but this is one of the first things he's written for publication, and it is amazingly good. What I love about this, the premise is very unique. There's, again, no hook. Somebody just brings you this book and says, hey, this is kind of weird, and you go, yeah, it is. And it turns out that the book itself is not as important as the fact that it has a magical advertisement keyed into it. And so basically advertising a beauty spa, a health spa, saying, wouldn't you like to be healthier or happier or shorter, taller, look prettier, whatever it is? And then a magical portal opens and you can go through into this beautiful little fairy clearing where there's a tower and there's a spa, and these 3 elf sisters will help you achieve your dreams. And great characters in this one. There's an awesome villain in this one. And it is, again, a wide open sandbox, which I really like. It presents you with the spa and all the people who are in it. And the characters just get to kind of meander around doing things that they would naturally do anyway. And they will uncover fairly quickly that something is clearly wrong, and then clue by clue put together what's going on and figure out how to solve it, and they can solve it any way they want. And it just ends up being a really great little story. So, Price of Beauty, 2 thumbs up. Now, Book of Cylinders is one of the other ones that I did not like. In fact, this is probably my least favorite one in the book, so I won't talk about it much. It is basically a pure combat scenario, and the adventure itself has the barest of connections to the Book of Cylinders. The idea here is that once you open this book, inside of it there are some little clay cylinders, and you lay out some clay on a table. You can, there's clay powder, you mix it with water, and then you roll these cylinders across, and it reveals a story. And that sounds awesome, and that's pretty much, that's it. That doesn't relate to the actual story in any way. Just the book is different from other books is all you can really take away from that. The frogs in it are really cool. It tells a story about some frog people called Gripply, who have been attacked by some snake people, some Yuan Ti, and you need to go and help them because they supply crab meat to a lot of people all over, and you've got to deal with that. And then, there's really nobody to talk to. There's nothing to learn from talking. There's some opportunities to sneak around, but for the most part, it's just straight combat, start to finish. It's very straightforward. There's no real twists to learn. The fact that there are 2 groups of Yuan Ti never really matters. There's a prophecy in it that never really matters. There is, a big evil thing at the end that is never explained. I just didn't like this one, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Sarah of Yellow Crest Manor. So, this begins with a fairly weak hook. Once you can figure out how to get the book into the hands of your players, they will instantly be confronted with a ghost, the ghost of Sarah, who was a servant in Yellow Crest Manor, and she can't talk to you because her tongue has been cut out. but clearly she is very scared about something. And people who do research into Yellowcrest Manor learn that about 5 years ago, while the master of the house was away, some kind of cultists sneaked in and murdered everyone, all the servants and the whole family that lived there. And so it's kind of a, this mass murder cultist cold case that the players get to figure out. And that involves a lot of travel. It involves a lot of going around. It's a really cool story, honestly. It's got, all 3 pillars of play: stealth and talking and fighting. Sneaking and talking. Fighting would be a better way to say that. The climax is maybe not as solid as I wanted. I was hoping for a good boss fight at the end, and it doesn't really have one. But it has a really wonderful investigation storyline that takes the players through different, places and locations and talk to different people. And all in all, it's a really fun murder mystery that I think works really well. So, hooray for Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor. Now, the Lore of Luru. So this one is similar to that pop-up book. This one is a storybook. And the good thing about it is that the tone of it, the vibe of it, is really kind of wonderful. It's all, fairies and unicorns and, houses inside of mushrooms and just really wonderful fae forest kind of stuff. That said, the gimmick of the adventure is that the players are playing through the story of the storybook. And so it is absolutely on rails the entire time. There's no player choice of any kind, and there's no stakes of any kind either, because if you die, you just go back to the library, and after a long rest, you can go back into the storybook if you want, and pick up immediately where the rest of your friends are. Like, time is frozen for them while you're outside of the book. There's, at the end, you don't defeat a real person, you defeat a storybook villain who can't actually affect the real world in any way. In fact, the final closing notes of the adventure include the line, which I wrote down verbatim: regardless of the outcome of the character's efforts, ellipsis, explanation. Nothing the characters do actually has any impact on anything. It's a really underwhelming story for that reason. But I still really liked the tone and the art and the storybook idea of it is fun and cute. So hooray for that. Now, let's look at Candlekeep Destruction. This is the level 9th adventure. And this is one where I have very mixed feelings. I am glad that it's in here because I guarantee that this is going to be somebody's absolute favorite adventure in the book, because it is so unique and so different from everything else. I feel like the story itself is kind of fundamentally broken, but the tone and the style, the flavor that it's going for, is absolutely unique among the rest of the adventures in the supplement. And so it's a really good inclusion for that. In brief, what's going on, and this is spoiler territory, so if you're a player, close your ears or do something. One of the towers in the library turns out to be a rocket, and some janitors who work there have figured out that they can launch it into space. And clearly it's a gnome who's behind all this, obviously. And their kind of purpose behind this is they're going to protect all the books by launching them into space. And so they're going around and they're collecting some of the more famous books from the library to keep them all in here, and then it's going to launch. The problem is that the actual storytelling is flawed in 2 ways. First of all, if the characters at the beginning, once they find the book, there's this dwarf librarian that comes stumbling towards them, hands them the book, and then dies. And the book is... the adventure is very clear about the fact that you cannot bring him back to life. So first of all, there's several avenues of investigation cut off. If the characters fail a DC 25 history check, then they don't know anything about the rocket or what's going on. And furthermore, if they don't have access to, or if they don't think to cast the Speak with Dead spell, then there's no way for them to learn about what's going on in the story, about who this guy is or why he died or anything. So those are two just gigantic barriers that hinge on some relatively arbitrary stuff. And if your players don't pass either of those barriers, they're going to be super confused. The story launches into a pretty quick time crunch. There's an earthquake, and if you don't know what's going on, if you didn't cast that Speak with Dead spell, you have no idea what the earthquake means. And 1 hour later, the rocket will launch into space. And if the characters don't know that they have a 1 hour time limit to solve this problem, then they're going to be really lost. A lot of the other avenues to discover what's actually going on get no treatment. They're not addressed. So like the fact that these people have been stealing important books from all over the place, that doesn't really matter either. That could be something that a GM who's looking for ways to get them into the story could say, oh, well, the book that you're trying to find is lost. Who knows where it is? And then maybe you could do some investigation and eventually get to this place. But there is barrier after barrier impeding the characters from actually finding the information that they need. And for a 9th level adventure, I can understand the need to make it difficult. But for example, the tower that is going to launch into space is part of the inner ward, where public figures are not allowed. You have to be an actual avowed priest, for the most part, to be even given access to go back there. And so there is a character in there, a dragon whose name is Bookworm, who can give you access, but only if you convince him that the rocket's going to go up. And if you don't know about the rocket, I don't know. Let's talk about what I love about these adventures. Like I said, the storytelling is broken. But what works really well is, similar to the last one, the tone and the flavor of it. This is a gnome whose name is Stonky, and he's got his secret group of library janitors who all have ridiculous nicknames that are based on an animal and a trade good. And so there's one named Ram Sugar, and there's one named Sheep Sweet Corn. The dwarf who brings you the book and then dies, his secret code name is Rooster Muffin. And so you can see that they're really going for a lighthearted, comedic take on an adventure. And that is great, and that works really well. I don't think that the story itself works at all, but I think that a GM who loves this kind of thing, who wants to do, the magical tower launching itself into space, I think that there's a lot there. I think that the right player group and the right DM will absolutely adore this adventure if they put in the work to fix all the broken parts of it. So, there you go. Candlekeep Destruction. Let's talk about Zekran's Zephyrian Tome. This one is really cool. It has, again, a fairly weak hook. That is a plague of most of these adventures. As you can see here, the book has a lock on it, and you can't open it. It is completely 100% unopenable unless you pick it up with the intent to take it out of the library, which, to be clear, is very against the rules of the library. And so unless your characters are literally thieves planning to steal something, they will never discover what this adventure is or what's going on. And I think that that is a pretty big problem with it. But once you've gotten over that hurdle, the rest of it is an absolute delight. It is a good story that is well told. You open that lock, and a genie pops out of the book and says, "Hey, I've been trapped here by this evil wizard who is trying to do all this shenanigans. Will you help free me from this prison by bringing down the evil wizard?" And if they say yes, then they go. There's a huge scope to this story. They will travel all over the place. It takes advantage of some of the extreme element rules, like extreme cold and climbing. There is a really good story. There's a really great boss fight at the end of it. So, once your characters hit this level of 9 or 10, 11, right in the key range to work for this challenge rating, as soon as they decide they're going to try to steal something, slip this book in there somehow so that they can pop it open. And boom, you've got your adventure, and it's a really good one. Hooray! Let's look at The Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale. This one is it's really good. It actually has a hook that makes sense. It has a very cool setting with some very neat effects to it. It's a demi-plane with some broken effects. There's some things in it that are not right. And so the characters are hired by somebody outside who says, hey, we trapped this guy in this demi-plane because he was cursed, and we didn't want to hurt him because we think he's wonderful, but he needed to be contained for his and everyone else's safety until we could find a cure for the curse. We've found it. Will you please go in and cure him? That would be great. Thank you very much. And so the book itself is, again, the portal that takes you to the magical place, and you go through, and you've got to figure out what's going on, because things are not exactly what the people who hired you said they were. And there's some mysteries, and there's a lot of danger. It has all three pillars of play in plenty: sneaking, fighting, and talking. Although, of note, I've complained in the past about some boss fights that felt kind of weak. This one doesn't really have a boss fight unless you want to have one. And it's entirely possible to get out of this without really fighting at all. And I think that's one of the strengths of it, because it manages to replace the boss fight with different expectations and with different kinds of play. There's a chance to just kind of investigate and talk your way through this problem and sneak and deceive. And it ends with a big fancy party where you're there under semi-false pretenses, which is one of my favorite tropes anyway. Really, really good. Also, as you can tell by the title, The Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale, this is written by, who's the author? Kiana Shaw, knows their meter. And so there is a kind of secret phrase hidden in one of the books that has absolutely beautiful, flawless meter in it. And that is one of my favorite things. So, whereas some of the other adventures in the book, in all of role-playing, people will come up with little songs or little passcodes or whatever that don't quite work, and you kind of have to cheat your rhythm. This one you don't, and it's an incredibly minor thing, but it made me unbelievably happy, so I'm telling you about it. Anyway, Curious Tale of Wisteria Vale is wonderful. Let's talk about the Book of Inner Alchemy. Now, as you might guess from the title, depending on how much Taoist philosophy you know, this one is kind of a martial arts-based adventure. And while it is really good, there's a hook in there, but it's kind of buried in the story. The hook is phenomenal. It's probably one of the best hooks, which is someone broke into the library and stole some pages out of this book, out of the Book of Inner Alchemy. And you realize, oh no, based on the pages that they stole, according to this librarian, they could now create this incredibly dangerous magic item. We need to track them down and stop them. And what follows is, straight out of like a wuxia kung fu movie, very martial arts based, very keeping with that kind of style and tone. It is incredibly straightforward. There's no mysteries to solve and there's no twists. You know what kind of adventure it's going to be, and then that's what it is, and then you're done. But that's not necessarily a problem. It has a really great feel to it. It's very different tonally from everything else in the book. And it leaves you with some really great hooks for future adventures. So it not only is just something you could stick into the middle of a campaign, it's something you could spin out into several more adventures and turn into a campaign on its own. There's also, as you would expect from a martial arts movie, a really good boss fight. So, hooray! Let's look at the next one then, which is the Canopy Being. And I'm losing my voice a little bit. Okay. I know I should edit me taking a drink out of this video, but I don't like doing edits in the middle of videos. So you just get to watch me drink some water. Okay, let's look at the Canopy Being. This has an absolutely stellar hook to it. I said the last one had the best hook in the book. This is the best hook in the book. Though it is undercut slightly by the fact that it ends up... spoilers! If you're a player, don't watch this part of the video. So the hook at the beginning of this is that the Canopy Being is this book here that someone has found. About 9 months ago, somebody mailed it to the library and said, here you go. And so someone's been reading through it, and the librarian who was reading through it up and left and said, you know what, I really have to go to this other place, to this other temple, and do some research there, because something in this book freaked me out. And so that person disappears. And then the librarians come to you, to the players, and they say, hey, so the thing that freaked out this other librarian is that this book contains instructions on how to implant the organs of an undead mummy into living people. And then at the end it has a list of all the people that has already happened to. And the last few names on the list were the librarian, who was reading this book and got freaked out by it, and then all of you. All the players' names are in this book. And that is such a wonderful way to start a story. That, you know, they've allegedly already had some organs replaced, you know, swapped organs with a mummy. But here's where we get into the spoiler territory. That ends up being false. That's not actually true. And in fact, the book says, hey, you know that cool adventure hook we had? It's up to the GM to decide what it means. Because the adventure itself doesn't actually deal with it in any way. What follows is the assumption that the characters are going to go straight to that temple, just like the librarian did, which first of all seems foolish to me, but... and then once they get there, it's just a dungeon crawl. It is a really fascinating, incredibly well done, very unique and interesting dungeon crawl. But it is, at the end of the day, just a dungeon crawl. And there's not a lot of story, there's not a lot of twists, and the hook, like I said, goes nowhere. It's all set up for the future, which is all GM discretion. So if you as a GM have a really good idea of what to do with this mummy replacement organ thing, you can tell a great story using this as a hook. Though if you're at level 13 and still looking for a hook, maybe something has already gone wrong. I don't know. I really like this one. It just, the fact that really great hook doesn't go anywhere, I don't know. This one is not a story. This one is the introduction to a good story, and then a really fun dungeon crawl, and then a little paragraph that says, tell the story yourself, Game Master. So, that's what this one is. Scrivener's Tale, on the other hand, is one of the others that I wrote. This is probably the best one in the book. And this one actually might be my favorite one. Even out of the four that I think are the best one, this might be the best one. It is basically a book that is handed to the players by accident. Somebody is, they're there researching whatever it is that they're researching, and the little librarian who's like, sure, I'll bring you the books, comes back with the little cart and says, here's this one, here's this one, here's this one. And when they pick up Scrivener's Tale and start to read it, they are instantly cursed with the Scrivener's mark. At which point, the librarian says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I brought you the wrong book. As hooks go, that's a pretty weak one. But the story that spins out from there is phenomenal. The Scrivener's Mark covers 20% of their body with text written in Elvish that is kind of this story of the book. And every few days, and there's some good guidance in there as to how exactly to time this based on the pacing you want to create in your game, there's a chance that that curse will grow. There's actually 5 full levels of the Scrivener's Mark, and once you get to 5, you are petrified into a glass statue. But up until then, each level of the mark comes with a benefit and a drawback. So you are becoming more powerful and more vulnerable at the same time, and you're under this kind of sharp clock where you know you have to solve the problem as quickly as possible before it gets out of hand. So, the story that surrounds this curse is basically trouble in a fey court. There are 2 people who hate each other, and the players are never certain which one is good and which one is bad. And so they need to go off and find the solution to this curse while dealing with being haunted by this mysterious voice, being hunted by fey agents, and it creates this wonderful sense of doom and paranoia all wrapped inside a really kind of cool globe-trotting adventure while you try to find the different parts of this, figure out what's going on, figure out who you can trust, figure out how to break the curse. I can't say enough good about this adventure. It is, like I said, possibly my favorite one in the book. So, Scrivener's Tale, level 14, really rad stuff. Let's go to Alcazar's Appendix. This is the 4th one that I wrote. This is maybe the best one in the book. This one, whereas the Book of Inner Alchemy was obviously very martial arts movie kind of tone to it, this one feels more like Arabian Nights or The Adventures of Sinbad. It kind of has that flavor to it in a really good way. And in fact, the hook for it is very basic but very fun, which is, this Candlekeep library has been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and some of the librarians are old enough to remember when this version's Sinbad, whose name is Alcazar, he used to come here and he used to tell stories, and everyone loved it, and he wrote his adventures down, and he wrote, Alcazar's Thrilling Tales, which is this big, thick book here, and then he also wrote Alcazar's Appendix, which is, an addendum to the larger book, and it is the story of the adventure he was never able to solve on his own. And so the characters then have the chance, once they read that adventure and discover the stakes at play, which is basically there's an unbelievably powerful magic item that he almost found but didn't quite, then the player characters have the chance to go, well, we should go and find this item. And so what follows then is another book is the portal thing that sends you off into the desert, and you befriend a golem, and you travel around, and it's so good. It's such a good... There's mystery, there's deduction, there's puzzle solving, there's social interaction, there's a lot of good options for what to do if things go wrong, if the players make choices you're not expecting. There's a really great optional encounter that you can throw in if you feel like you need it in order to make the story work. And I really appreciate when game writers include those kinds of things, because an experienced GM is going to know how to fix a lot of those problems anyway, but the purpose of a published adventure like this is to do as much of that planning for us as possible. And so it's really well done. There's an absolutely wonderful climax and boss battle at the end of this. And, of course, the atmosphere of it, the tone and the flavor of that kind of Adventures of Sinbad thing just really sings This is phenomenal story that I really, really loved. So, good on you. Now for Xanthoria. This is the last one in the book. This one is yet another dungeon crawl. It's a level 16 dungeon crawl, so not only is it dangerous, it's pretty horrific. It begins with a really nasty but very effective story hook, which is the world, the Sword Coast, perhaps all of Faerun, is suddenly plagued by this really horrible kind of mycelial fungus zombie plague. People are catching this fungus that kind of takes over their bodies, and then they find themselves repeating the word Xanthoria over and over, and it's incredibly contagious. So the characters have to, stay away from there, but then they go to the Candlekeep and they say, we need to figure out what's going on. What do you know about Xanthoria? At which point one of the librarians brings out this lichen-encrusted book and says, I've been expecting this. Here's a book that talks all about this person who, tried to achieve immortality through kind of fungus rather than through necromancy. And I suspect, because her name is Xanthoria, that it is related to what's currently going on. And what follows then is, like I said, basically just a dungeon crawl, but a really, really good one that ends with, it's got some good... It's one of those really good dungeon crawls where there's multiple ways around the different obstacles, where there's people inside of the dungeon that you can befriend, who can give you advice or help or, secrets. It's just really good. And then the ending of it is not only is there a phenomenal kind of final showdown, but there's a pretty painful moral conundrum as well that will be fun, I think, for a lot of groups to have to do. Conundrum is maybe the wrong word, because it's very obvious what the right option is. It's just going to hurt emotionally to go through with it. So, anyway, it's really good. Let me actually show you the Lichen Lich. Check that out! The Lichen Lich. But I don't want to give anything away, so I just wanted to show off that piece of art. Anyway, there you go. You've seen the piece of art. So, that is the book. That is Candlekeep Mysteries. This is the first time that, at least for 5th edition, D&D has produced a little anthology like this that's all one-shots rather than a big campaign. Now, you absolutely could run this as a campaign if you connect your characters to the Candlekeep in some way, and then, you've got adventures level 1 through 16 to occupy their time and keep them busy. You could tell a really great ongoing campaign using just this book. Alternately, you can slot these into campaigns. If you've got your own world, whether it's Faerun or Eberron or whatever, or your own homebrew, you can find a way to fit these stories into it. And then that's one of the reasons that I don't really knock off any points for having some weak story hooks, because they're really designed for you as the game master to mold them to your will and say, I need them to go on this fun quest and fight this Lichen Lich or whatever. What's the best way? How do I do that? And so there's a lot of different ways to introduce all of these stories. One of the things that I will probably be using this book for is one-shots. When I run one-shots for people at conferences, or when they hire me, or when my friends and I've got 4 hours to kill and we don't have an ongoing campaign, it is super easy to pull this book out and run one of these adventures at whatever level you want to play your one-shot. So it's a wonderful book. There's a couple in there, like I said, that were kind of lackluster. Maybe the storytelling didn't work, But overall, this is a really fantastic adventure supplement full of some really good stories that are presented in a wonderful way. So I honestly hope we see a lot more of this kind of thing from Wizards. This is a great thing to do with D&D, to have this kind of book come out. And some of them, like I said, are among the very best role-playing adventures that I've seen, D&D or otherwise. So hooray for that. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Thanks for sticking with me this long if you watched the whole thing. I wanted to make sure to really give each adventure their due. So, I am Dan Wells. I am an author. Go read all my books. There's links below. I am also a professional game master, and I can run any game for you, including perhaps some of the one-shots from Candlekeep Mysteries. So if you're interested in hiring me for that, there are links below this video. Other than that, you're awesome, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.